Welcome, friend. I'm Jack, host of the channel, and today we're diving into another episode. Pour yourself a drink and get comfortable, because I've got a powerful story coming your way. If something hits deep, drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's get into it.
I might be the first husband in the history of dysfunctional marriages to actually send his wife's lover a thank you card. Believe it or not, I actually did. I am almost never sick, but there was a particularly nasty strain of influenza going around the office where I worked. One Tuesday morning, I was displaying the symptoms quite dramatically, so rather than risk infecting the entire office, my boss decided to send me home. It was around noon, and I thought my wife, Sarah, could nurse me back to health, make me some chicken soup, take my temperature, and generally fuss over me before tucking me into bed. As I turned onto the street where we lived and approached my house, I noticed a red pickup truck parked in the driveway. I did not think much of it at that moment. I could hardly think of anything other than how awful I felt. The vehicle was unfamiliar, and since it was occupying the space where my old station wagon usually sat, I parked by the curb. I entered through the garage, which led into the kitchen. There was no sign of Sarah in the kitchen or the front living room. At that point, a queasy feeling, unrelated to the influenza, began to form in my stomach, especially as I approached the back of the house, where our bedroom was located, and began to hear unmistakable sounds of an affair. I tiptoed toward the bedroom door, which was slightly ajar, and peeked in. Naturally, I saw Sarah with some tall, lanky man I had never seen before, and she appeared to be thoroughly enjoying herself. My reaction was strange. Part of me obviously wanted to storm in and break up their little party, but another part of me was just numb. I should clarify that I was not aroused. When you have loved someone for as long as I have loved Sarah, the sight of that person cheating on you is anything but a turn on, assuming you are wired normally, and I am. I have always been someone who took fidelity very seriously. In a single heartbeat, I had a moment of clarity, where my future suddenly unfurled before my eyes. I made a decision in that moment that my life was about to change, and it would be for the better. I took out my cell phone, pushed the door open, raised the phone with the camera mode activated, and snapped 4 very clear pictures of the startled lovers. Having obtained visual evidence of my wife's infidelity and her lover, I turned on my heel and exited the house briskly, the same way I had entered. On my way out through the garage, I grabbed a screwdriver and casually used it to puncture large holes in 2 of the tires on the guy's truck. I know it was childish, but it felt like the least I could do. Then I got into my car and drove off, but not before jotting down the license plate number of the pickup. This was the first day of the rest of my life. As I drove around aimlessly, I pondered what I had just witnessed and realized that it had been brewing for a long time. I had no idea how long Sarah had been cheating on me or whether this guy was the first or just another in a long line. It did not matter because, truthfully, I did not care. I suppose some background is in order at this point. My name is Robert Johnson, and at the time of this story, I was 40 years old and had been married to Sarah for exactly half that time. At one point, we were passionately in love. In fact, it was almost love at first sight. We met shortly after I graduated from college and started working for a major tech company located in a mid-sized Midwestern city. I had grown up in northern Arizona, hoping to find something closer to the mountains where I had camped almost every year as a child. Sarah was from the city where we had lived our entire married life. I honestly cannot pinpoint when my marriage started to decline. It was a very long, very slow descent that would not have been noticeable to an outsider, but it was there, and I could sense it toward the end. We all have dreams, and mine was to live in the mountains and write the great American novel. I think Sarah's big dream was simply to land a husband and raise a family in her hometown. You know how dreams often go. They shatter on the jagged edges of reality. The reality for me was that I ended up stuck in this bland Midwestern town, writing computer programs for the same company I had started with after college. I reached a certain point on the corporate ladder and then stagnated as more ambitious men and women surpassed me. Part of my problem was that I would not cut corners. I was a perfectionist when it came to my work and did not tolerate fools who took shortcuts. Another part of my problem was that I had become so proficient at my particular job that I was indispensable in that position. As a result, I was passed over for promotions, although I did receive regular raises and occasional bonuses. But another part of my problem was that I had a rather passive personality. I was content to go along to get along, and that extended to my marriage. Do not get me wrong, Sarah was an attractive woman with dark brown hair and a full figure, and I had always loved her. She never quite lost all the weight she gained during our 2 pregnancies, but I still found her attractive, and apparently so did someone else. We bought a house shortly after we were married. It was in a decent neighborhood, but certainly not in the upscale district. The house was built in the 1970s, and many things in it had not been replaced in all that time. So we gradually replaced one appliance after another with no particular rhyme or reason. We were always fixing this and patching that. We frequently talked about buying something better, but after refinancing the mortgage as collateral for loans a couple of times, we found that we had priced ourselves out of any chance of selling it. In other words, what it would have taken to pay off the loan and purchase something better was more than the house was actually worth. We could have sold it for less to someone as a fixer-upper, but that still would not have solved the problem of finding a better place to live that we could afford. Then there was the issue with our children. 3 years into our marriage, we had a son, David. 4 years later, we had a daughter, Emily. These kids were the poster children for why some animals in the wild eat their young. I tried to be the disciplinarian as much as I could, but Sarah's idea of discipline was to give them whatever they wanted, and she refused to let me punish them for any infraction. The consequences were rather severe. David was lazy, disrespectful, and unkempt, while Emily was a neurotic mess. They learned early on how to play Sarah and me against each other to get what they wanted, and as a result, we lost control of them. By the time they were teenagers, David was about to lose his 6th minimum wage job since barely graduating from high school. Employers, it seems, prefer their workers to show up on time and in a reasonably presentable state. They are funny that way. He was living in a shabby house in town with 3 of his slacker friends, and I was pretty sure he was at the very least smoking marijuana and drinking heavily. Emily was about to flunk out of high school because she could not keep her headphones out of her ears long enough to pay attention in class. She was also dating some sleazy college guy with tattoos up and down both arms. Sarah was a nurse, and at some point in her career, she decided she preferred the night shift. So, on the days that she worked, I would get home around 5:30 in the evening. We would sometimes have dinner, then she would leave for work around 6:15. Because of our conflicting schedules, we spent less and less time interacting with each other, and our relationship began to wither. We would make time for each other once or twice a month, usually on a weekend afternoon when she was off. It was decent enough. There is no such thing as a bad relationship, but it was quite mundane. We would undress, touch each other for a few minutes, I would satisfy her, and then we would just drift apart again. Once in a great while, Sarah would still want me to show her some affection. We got along well enough until about a year before the incident, when she started becoming rather abrasive toward me. She had always been somewhat moody, but I guess when midlife struck, it hit her hard. Soon, she was finding excuses not to be intimate, at least not with me. Sometimes it was a headache. Sometimes she was tired. Often she went to bed well before I was ready, and so on. She was constantly finding fault with something I had done or had not done. Looking back on it, the signs were there. I just did not see them. Sometimes I would call the house during the day when I knew Sarah should have been up and about, and there would be no answer. Sometimes she would stop in for drinks with some co-workers at a late-night bar that catered to night shift workers. A few times, she would come home on weekends after working and immediately start a load of laundry, as if she had something she wanted to wash before I could see it. Everything pointed to Sarah's infidelity, but as I mentioned earlier, it really did not matter. So, let us recap. I was stuck in a dead-end job in a nowhere town, living in a rundown house that was overpriced. My love life was non-existent, my abrasive wife was cheating on me, and my children were budding delinquents. What would you do? Probably what I did. The very first thing I did was go to the walk-in clinic to address my influenza. I received a steroid shot and a prescription for an antibiotic. Feeling slightly better, I went to the local superstore to have my prescription filled and to buy some essentials: toiletries, a hot plate, a small pot, some soup, and sodas. Then I drove all the way across town and rented a motel room. I had stopped at the bank on my way to the superstore and withdrawn some cash to pay for a place to stay for a few days. Once I got settled in, I sat down and drafted a game plan for the next few days while I heated a can of soup. I ate as much as I could, stored the rest in the mini refrigerator, crawled into bed, and passed out. It was dark when I woke up, and I felt disoriented until I remembered where I was and why I was there. I was still weak from the influenza and in a daze. It took 2 days, my illness, and the shock of seeing Sarah like that to truly comprehend what had happened. I reheated what was left of the soup, drank a soda, watched a football game on television, then went back to bed. I did check my cell phone and saw a dozen calls from Sarah. I smiled grimly at that. Let her stew, I thought. I woke up the next morning feeling much better. The first thing I did was call the office to let them know I would not be coming in to work. My boss's secretary answered the phone, and after I explained why I was calling, she informed me that Sarah had been calling all afternoon looking for me. She did she? I said. If she calls again today, and I imagine she will, just tell her I have called in sick and will not be in today. That should at least get her off your back. Robert, where are you? She asked. Let me put it this way and see if you can figure it out, I replied. I am not at my house, all right? Then I hung up. I thought I had made it quite clear that I no longer considered it my home. I had spent a lot of time thinking about my next steps, and the more I thought about it, the more I liked the idea. I really could not be angry at Sarah. It was pretty evident that she did not want to be married to me anymore. For some reason, she desired something I could not provide, whatever that was, and I was not going to hold her back from whatever she wanted. If she wanted to be with other men, fine. I would give her the freedom to do so, and in the process, I would free myself. However, I still had some unfinished business. There would be consequences for both Sarah and her lover. Nothing too severe, but consequences nonetheless. The first thing I did was call the Department of Motor Vehicles and tell them I was interested in buying a pickup truck, but I had lost the owner's phone number. All I had was the license plate number along with the make, model, and color of the truck. The friendly woman on the other end of the line cheerfully provided the man's name and address. My next move was to call a friend of mine who was a lawyer and get the name of the best divorce attorney in town. I contacted that reputable lady, as it happened, and scheduled an appointment for 10 that morning. I showered, then went down to the lobby for a light breakfast before heading to the bank. I had 2 certificates of deposit that I had purchased several years earlier. I cashed those in, withdrew half of the money in our joint savings account and half of what little there was in the checking account. I deposited most of the money in a new checking account that I opened in my name only, along with a bank debit card, and still walked out with a little over $5,000 in traveler's checks. I spent the next few minutes calling credit card companies to cancel all but one of my cards and have the accounts transferred to my name only. I also paid off the balances on each of those cards. The one card I generously left for Sarah, I did not bother paying off. Let her deal with that one. Next, I went to a branch of the public library, where I purchased some computer time. I took the 4 photos I had taken on my cell phone, downloaded them onto an email account I had set up, and printed 2 copies of each one. I have to admit they were very clear and explicit. Then I researched the man who had been with my wife the previous day, a certain Daniel Green. I discovered he was married, so I jotted down his wife's name, attached a copy of the pictures with a note letting her know where I could be reached for more information, and placed them in an envelope with her name and address on it. I went to the post office, bought some stamps, and mailed it to her. Then it was time for my appointment with Catherine Myers, the attorney. I explained to her what I had done and what my plans were, and she nodded as I showed her the pictures. Her first question, however, was one of caution. Divorce seems like a pretty drastic step on such short notice, she said. Are you sure you do not want to try to work it out? What is there to work out? I asked. My wife has a lover, and I do not want to stand in the way of true love. I have places I want to go, things I want to do with my life, and staying here with a cheating wife is not part of those plans. In the end, I agreed to a legal separation for 90 days. The divorce papers were drawn up, and if, after 3 months, I was still determined to end my marriage, then the papers would be filed and Sarah would be served. Now, if you proceed with the divorce, what sort of settlement are you looking for? Catherine asked. I have already taken half of the liquid cash in our bank, I said. She has a 403B plan she is contributing to from her job. She can keep that, but she does not get any of my 401K either. She can keep the house. The mortgage is in her name anyway, and I do not want it. If she does sell it, though, I want half of all proceeds from the sale. All right, Mr. Johnson, I think that about covers it, Catherine said. I will look forward to hearing from you in about 3 months. My last stop was at the office, but not to work. I walked into the Human Resources Department and inquired about the process of taking early retirement. I had 22 years with the company, so I had a substantial amount of retirement saved up. I was informed that I could start drawing on my retirement pension when I turned 60, which was 18 years away. I frowned at that, but perked up when I asked about cashing in my 401K. Of course, the lady in Human Resources strongly advised against it due to the hefty tax penalty I would have to pay. Nevertheless, if I chose to, I could receive an immediate cash payout of approximately $70,000. I thanked the lady and headed back to my motel. I was exhausted, and after making another pot of chicken soup, I went to bed and slept for nearly 7 hours. It was after midnight when I woke up, and I knew I now faced the hardest part of my ordeal, going back to the house to collect my things. Sarah was supposed to be at work, but I was not sure if she had actually gone in. As it turned out, she had not. Sarah was asleep when I quietly slipped in, and the house was silent. Apparently, David was so concerned about my whereabouts that he had gone out like he always did on Friday nights. I wondered if the kids would even miss me when I was gone. Probably not. The first thing I did was gather what I needed from the garage: tools, camping gear, and other useful items. I went into the small office area, retrieved my laptop, plugged it in, downloaded some files from the home computer onto the laptop, and then carried it to my vehicle. I had a couple of boxes with me that I filled with CDs, a portable player, a lot of books, and some mementos that meant something to me, including a few pictures, though none of Sarah. After loading that into my vehicle, I got some suitcases and quietly entered my former bedroom. I was about halfway through packing when I heard a small gasp behind me, followed by Sarah's voice. "Robert, where have you been?" she asked. "I have been worried sick about you." "Oh, have you now?" I said, trying to keep the anger out of my voice. "What are you doing?" Sarah asked. "What does it look like I am doing?" I responded sarcastically. "Packing," Sarah said in a trembling voice. "Give that woman a gold star for brilliance," I replied. "Robert, I am so sorry," she began. "Sarah, I do not want to hear your excuses or your apologies," I said. "It really does not matter why or how or even who, although I do know that much. You want to love someone else? Fine, I am letting you." "But I do not love him," she protested. "I love you. I do not want him. I want you." "Could have fooled me," I said in a bitter tone. "It sounded to me like you wanted him pretty badly yesterday afternoon. Let me see if I can recall the exact words. Oh, God, screw me. Is that about right?" Sarah just buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. I looked at her evenly. Whatever brief flash of anger I had felt was gone, replaced by, I am not sure. No, not that. Disdain, maybe a little. Disgust, yes, somewhat. But mostly, I realized that what I was feeling was emptiness. I realized at that moment that I had no feelings for her whatsoever. I simply did not care anymore. I finished packing and let her sob into her pillow. It was not until I started out the bedroom door with the suitcases that she jumped out of bed and tried to stop me. "Wait," Sarah cried. "Do not leave me. Robert, please. Can't we work this out? Please, I am sorry. It was nothing. Just a mistake." I just stared at her silently as I carefully extricated myself from her grasping arms and walked toward the front of the house. Sarah followed me, crying hysterically. I pointed out the notice of legal separation on the kitchen table amidst the dirty remnants of that night's pizza dinner. "I will be back in 3 months, early December," I said. "If I am still thinking then as I am now, I will follow through with a divorce. I will let you know roughly where I am, but I am leaving, and I am not sure yet where I will be. Goodbye, Sarah. I will see you around." "Robert, no!" Sarah cried as I walked out the front door with my suitcases. I did not look back as I climbed into my vehicle and drove back across town to my motel room. The next day was Saturday, so I slept in. When I eventually got up, I packed up my belongings in the motel room and checked out. At $85 a night, the motel was a bit steep, and there was a place near my office that catered to visiting business people. They had long-term rates that were significantly cheaper than the average motel. For about $45 a night, I rented a clean room for 2 weeks that had a nice little kitchenette, internet, cable access, and a large television with pay-per-view movies, if I was interested. I did watch some movies on the TV, but mostly I relaxed and indulged myself in football all weekend, doing absolutely nothing else. Then, on Monday morning, I went to work. The first thing I did was walk into my boss's office and hand him my resignation letter, effective in 2 weeks. Needless to say, everyone in the office was stunned. I had been there so long and in the same role that I suppose I had become part of the furniture. My boss, in particular, was in a panic. He spent the entire 2 weeks trying to talk me out of retiring, but I was adamant. On Tuesday of the first week, I received a call from my daughter. It was quite an enlightening conversation. "Dad, why are you leaving us?" Emily asked. "You will have to ask your mother," I replied. "She said to ask you," Emily said. "All right," I said. Friday afternoon, I caught her with another man. I was sick with the flu, left work early, and there she was. I have pictures to prove it. "Wow," Emily said. "I did not think she had it in her. Well, that explains why she has been so weepy. Dad, she is a wreck. She just sits around crying and cursing herself. You know, she called in sick all 3 days this weekend." "Look, tell your mother to pull herself together," I said through gritted teeth. "If she thinks she can guilt-trip me into coming back to her, she is very mistaken. I have already applied for retirement, and a week from Saturday I am gone. After that, what she does, what you do, and what your brother does is none of my concern." "Well, I love you too, Dad," Emily cried. "Hey, you never cared much about me before now, so why start now?" I said. "You are just afraid the gravy train is about to leave the station." "That is not true," Emily said, sounding slightly hurt. I need you. You are the only one in this house with any sense, and I do not know what is going to happen without you." "Oh, I am sure you will manage," I said. "Look, Emily, I am sorry for what I said. That was mean of me. I will be in touch, and I will be home for Christmas, all right? I love you, truly." "I know, Dad," she said with a sniffle. "I love you too." David never called. I had a pretty busy 2 weeks. Sarah tried to call multiple times, but after I hung up on her a few times, she got the hint that I did not want to talk to her. Her friends from work tried to get me to at least meet with her, but I refused and made it clear in no uncertain terms. It turns out Daniel Green was a nurse in the unit where Sarah worked, and they had been seeing each other for about 6 months. Most people I spoke with believed he was the only one she had been unfaithful with, but they could not be certain. I made a point to tell them all how much I appreciated their silence about my wife's activities behind my back. They did not have much to say after that. I received a call in the middle of the first week from Daniel Green's wife, and apparently Sarah was not the first woman, married or otherwise, he had fooled around with. But Sarah would be the last, at least while he was her husband, because I had finally provided her with the solid proof she needed to kick him out. Interestingly, I never heard from Daniel either about Sarah or his ruined tires. I had quite a lot to do before leaving my job. I had to train someone to handle my position until they could hire a permanent replacement. I had to get my 10-year-old vehicle serviced. I had to find a broker who could transfer my 401k into a private account, and I had to meet with human resources about my severance pay and cashing in my remaining sick time. I spent most of my downtime watching television, playing around on my laptop, or shopping for things I would need once I left town. I also visited a few friends, all of whom expressed disbelief that Sarah would cheat on me. Before I knew it, the second Friday arrived, my last day of work, and with it came a slight sense of regret. I had spent 22 years at that company and made many friends. At lunch that day, my boss gathered our department together for a little retirement party, and that is when I finally lost my composure. I was trying to give a brief thank you speech when I suddenly broke down and cried, the first time I had cried over anything in years. I wept both because I was leaving and because of the circumstances that had led me to the decision to retire. I had kept myself so busy over the past 2 weeks that I had not allowed myself to process the emotions over Sarah's betrayal, and seeing my colleagues gathered to honor me was just too overwhelming. But I recovered quickly, especially when Amanda Taylor came over to me and invited me to an after-work gathering with a few of them at a local bar. Of course, I accepted, even though I made it clear that I do not drink. Amanda was a fellow computer enthusiast, but she was also a stunningly attractive geek. She was in her early 30s, a tall blonde, divorced with a 10-year-old daughter who was spending the weekend with her father. And as she told me that, she gave me a very suggestive look. I must admit that I was a bit perplexed. I am not unattractive. In fact, I look considerably younger than my age, but I am not exactly a ladies' man, or at least I did not think I was. I am a bit shorter than average, about 5'9". I wear glasses, have a slight belly, and while I am no weakling, I am not a fitness enthusiast either. But I was about to discover that I had more appeal than I ever imagined. There were 7 of us, 3 women and 2 men besides Amanda and myself, and for once in my life, I was the center of attention. We sat for several hours, drinking beer. Well, I had tea, and shared stories about the plant, the town, and each other. In the midst of the celebration, we also took time to have dinner. As the night wore on, I found myself sitting next to Amanda, and it became rather apparent that she was flirting with me. She was sitting very close, placing her hand on my thigh or arm. I could not determine whether she was doing it because she was drunk or if she was genuinely interested. Finally, around 9, we started to part ways. I wanted to get an early start the next day and got up to leave. Then I glanced at Amanda, and I realized that she probably should not drive home, so I offered her a ride. After receiving hugs and handshakes and well wishes, I walked Amanda to my vehicle. Once inside, she moved in close, placed her hand on my thigh, and gave me a piercing look. "I am not that drunk," Amanda said. "I just wanted you to give me a ride, and not to my home either." "So, where do you want me to take you?" I asked, deliberately playing dumb. "Take me to your motel," she said, and she pulled my face close and kissed me deeply. "Amanda, you do not have to do this," I said when we finally broke apart. Yes, I am lonely, but I do not want pity." "Pity has nothing to do with it," she said. "Robert, I have had a crush on you ever since I started working here, and now I finally have a chance. I'm not letting it slip away." "You have had a crush on me?" I asked. "Come on, Amanda, look at me. I am a middle-aged, gray-haired man. First of all, you are not old. Second, your gray hair makes you look distinguished. Third, you are quite handsome. And fourth, you are one of the nicest men I know. You are one of the few men in that office who has never made a pass at me, or at any of the other women, for that matter. Trust me, we have noticed. You have always been a gentleman." "I have always been a gentleman," I said with a hint of bitterness. "Look, you are leaving tomorrow, and you deserve some tender, loving care before you go," Amanda said. "Now, are you going to take me back to your motel and spend some time with me, or not?" I laughed then and started the car. The truth is, I had many fantasies about Amanda Taylor, but I always thought she was out of my league. Besides, I was a married man who believed in fidelity. Technically, I suppose I was still married, but I was already legally separated, and deep down, I knew my marriage was over. Amanda Taylor was offering me her companionship, and I would be damned if I passed it up. The moment the door to my room closed, we were all over each other, kissing passionately, our hands exploring each other's bodies. In no time at all, I was admiring Amanda's slender physique as she reclined on the bed. We spent the evening talking, sharing stories, and enjoying each other's company. It was different, however, and Amanda was much more engaged and responsive than Sarah had ever been, at least with me. We held each other as we sought mutual satisfaction. I could see on Amanda's face that she was having a great time. I fell back on the bed and watched as Amanda sat up. Then she carefully. "Thanks," I said. "Sarah would never let me do that. She thought it was demeaning." "I can see why some women might think that," Amanda said. "Personally, I love it." We lay back on the bed and rested. Then we spent the rest of the night talking and bonding on a deeper level. After that, we fell asleep together. We woke up to the pale light of dawn filtering through the drapes. Then we got up, showered, and dressed. Amanda helped me pack. Then I checked out and drove her back to where her car was parked. Before she left, she gave me a gentle kiss. Then she looked into my eyes. "Robert, all I can say is your wife is a fool," she said. "She does not realize what she has thrown away." "Well, I guess sometimes you get used to someone and fall into a rut," I said. "I probably let things slide too much on my end. You know how it goes." "Yeah, I suppose I do," Amanda said. "Robert, I hope you find what you are looking for. But if you ever decide to return here for any reason, look me up. I promise I will treat you much better than Sarah did." "Thank you, Amanda," I said. "I will keep in touch. You never know what the future holds. Take care, all right?" "You too," she said. "Be safe." And with that, I was off. I got onto the interstate, heading west, and I did not look back. I was setting off alone to explore the country with no plans, no itinerary, no agenda. I had some places out west I wanted to visit, some things I wanted to do, but I had no specific schedule. I would go wherever my instincts led me. It was something I had wanted to do for years, but had never been able to. Either I could not afford it, had family obligations, or work commitments. Now, none of those things were holding me back. My first destination, however, was my hometown. I wanted to spend a few days with my parents, who were getting on in years, and I wanted to reconnect with some old friends. I ended up meeting someone I had not anticipated, and it was a delightful surprise. My parents were disappointed to hear that Sarah and I were separating, but my mom also said she was not shocked. "She just did not seem very happy the last few times you were here," Mom said. The following Monday, I was in the supermarket picking up supplies for my trip when I heard someone call my name. I turned around and smiled broadly as I saw a familiar face from my past. It was Lisa Thompson, a friend from school. She was actually a year behind me, but we always seemed to have a class or two together each year, and we became good friends. At the time, Lisa was a popular girl who was a bit too outgoing for me, but time had tempered her a bit. She had learned the hard way that the fast life was not always the good life, but time had been kind to her, and she was still quite attractive. In fact, age had made her even more appealing, softening her features and adding a bit of grace to her demeanor. She was slightly shorter than average, with thick, dark hair and expressive brown eyes. She had moved back to town after divorcing her second husband and was an assistant manager at the store. She lived alone in a small house in a quiet neighborhood not far from her daughter's family. We chatted for a few minutes, catching up on our lives. When I told her I was divorcing my wife, her eyes lit up. "I have tomorrow off," she said in a suggestive tone. "How about having dinner with me?" "I would love that," I said. "Any place in mind?" "How about my place?" she said. "It has been a while since I cooked dinner for a friend." I arrived at Lisa's place around 7 p.m. the next night to find her dressed casually yet stylishly. her face tastefully made up. We entered her small but neat house and soon enjoyed a homemade meal. I was about to learn that Lisa was an excellent cook, but I also discovered that she was a skilled conversationalist. While waiting for dinner to finish, we sat in her living room, very close, and caught up on each other's lives. She was very empathetic about what had happened to me, as well as what had happened to Sarah. Lisa had experienced her share of heartbreak, and she was able to provide some insights from both perspectives. It did not make me feel any better about the situation, but it did help. Dinner was quite special. Enchiladas, rice, and the best flan I have ever tasted. "How do you stay so slim when you cook like this?" I asked, pushing my bloated stomach away from the table. "Oh, I only cook like this on special occasions," Lisa said with a laugh. "If I ate like this every day, I would be as wide as I am tall." We moved to the living room again and sat very close on the couch. We talked for a while, eventually discussing why she had invited me over that night. "Because I wanted to do something I never got to do when we were in high school," she said. "You were always so nice, so cute, so kind, but I knew I could never have you back then. Times were different, and I had my own issues to deal with." "But you do not have that problem now, do you?" I said as I leaned in close. We kissed then, and I lost myself in her full lips and the warmth of her embrace. Lisa acted like someone who truly appreciated this moment, a woman who had not experienced this kind of connection in a long time, which made me value it even more. After a while, we found ourselves relaxing and sharing stories from our pasts. We laughed about old times and reflected on where life had taken us. It was a cathartic experience for both of us, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was truly connecting with someone on a deep, meaningful level. That moment was the first time I considered thanking Daniel Green for setting the events in motion that had brought me to this point. Thanks to Daniel and his affair with my wife, I was free from my comfortable but dull life in a dead-end town. I was free from an increasingly loveless marriage and a chaotic family life in a decaying house. I was free from a job that had long since ceased to challenge me in a large corporation where I felt lost in the shuffle. I was free to go anywhere, do anything, and connect with anyone I wanted, and I could not have done that with a clear conscience if I had not caught my wife and her lover in the act of infidelity. After catching our breath from the evening's conversation, Lisa and I continued to enjoy each other's company. It was the first of what I hoped would be many such nights. We spent the next day visiting each other and catching up on lost time before I set out in earnest the following day. As I drove, I reflected that it had been exactly 3 weeks since I had caught Sarah and Daniel, 3 weeks that had completely transformed my life. This journey was the first step in living my new life. Over the next few months, I traveled across the western half of the country, visiting places I had only read about. My first stop was Mount Rushmore. Then I spent a few days exploring the site of the Battle of Little Bighorn. I walked the grounds and communed with the ghosts of history, enjoying the freedom that came with being on my own. After that, I drove to Jackson Hole and camped out for a week while touring Yellowstone and the Grand Tetons. It was a liberating experience, being out in the open, away from the pressures of my former life. From there, I drove up to spend some time in northern Idaho, camping on the shores of a beautiful lake. I had been there once before when I was a teenager at a Boy Scout jamboree. While I was there, I fished the lake and hiked the trails, enjoying the cool mountains of the northern Rockies. When I woke up one morning in late October to 3 inches of snow on the ground, I knew it was time to move on to warmer climates. I headed to Seattle, then down the Pacific coast through Oregon to spend some time in wine country. And yes, I did sample some of the excellent wines the area is known for before heading to Yosemite for a few days. After that, I visited an aging aunt and uncle in the Los Angeles area, and they helped me fulfill a long-held dream of seeing the University of Southern California play the University of California, Los Angeles in one of the truly great college football rivalries at one of the most historic stadiums in the country. I also took a day to visit the beach, taking in all the beautiful scenery. I was in a gift shop across from the beach when I saw a postcard and got the mischievous idea of sending one to my wife and her lover. It featured a scenic view of the coastline with a caption, Greetings from the West Coast. I wrote a note on each one, thanking them for fooling around on me so I could take this trip. Then I sent one to the house for Sarah and one to the hospital for Daniel. That was the weekend before Thanksgiving, and it was time for me to head to where I really wanted to go. My best friend from high school lived in a beautiful mountain town not far from the Four Corners. He and his wife had started a small business and needed someone to help with computer marketing and other digital tasks. It was perfect for me. He owned a small house that he had been using as a rental property where I could stay, and he offered a flexible work schedule that would give me the freedom to go wherever I wanted whenever I wanted. I had spent a lot of my spare time on the road writing, and I had the makings of a pretty good book. I simply wrote about myself and my journey, why I was doing it, and other relevant reflections. Once I completed my business with Sarah and settled in Colorado, I would have time to refine my work. It was all about the changes in a middle-aged life as a result of one devastating event. I did not realize it that Monday when I set out east toward Colorado, but my life was about to change again in a completely unexpected way. I had been in Durango for a few days when Jessica, my friend Mark's wife, announced that she had invited a friend of hers to join us for Thanksgiving dinner. This woman lived alone, Jessica explained, and did not socialize much, but Jessica could not bear the thought of someone being alone on Thanksgiving, so she extended the invitation, and it had been accepted. Funny how life pivots on small decisions like that. Perhaps I would have met Sophie McDermott anyway after moving to Durango, but who knows what might have happened in the meantime. Maybe she would have decided to move on, or perhaps someone else would have come along and swept her off her feet. I do not know. All I know is that when Sophie walked through the door of Mark and Jessica's house, my stomach did a little flip, and before the day was over, I was determined to make her mine. I saw a woman in her mid-30s, quite tall, nearly 6 feet, slender but not skinny. She had a pale complexion with freckles, fiery red hair cut very short, and soft green eyes that were a captivating mix of playfulness and sadness. When she spoke, her voice sounded like a melody of warmth and kindness. Yes, she was a full-blooded native of Ireland who had come to the United States with an Irish dance troupe, one of those Riverdance groups, and had settled in Denver. She moved to Durango about a year earlier after breaking off an engagement just 2 days before the wedding. She had caught her groom to be at his bachelor party, making a serious mistake. She had not intended to crash his party, but she and a couple of her friends were on their way to breakfast after their bachelorette party when they happened to pass a strip club and saw her fiancé and his group coming out. One of the dancers from the club was wrapped around her intended, and she decided to follow them to see what would happen. It had been an emotionally scarring event, one more blow in a life that had already seen plenty. Her father had been an alcoholic who beat her mother until they fled when Sophie was 15, after he started beating her as well. Even then, she said, her father continued to stalk them relentlessly until the police finally intervened, and he was charged and convicted of spousal abuse. Later, she was assaulted while on holiday in London at age 22, and she had her heart broken several times after that, culminating in her fiancé's mistake. I think the reason we connected so well was that we both understood the pain of betrayal. During the previous weeks of travel, I had thought a lot about Sarah and what she had done, and I could not reconcile her declarations of love for me with the image of her in bed with another man. She had betrayed me and our marriage, and I had no idea why. I had been telling myself all along that I did not care, but that was not entirely true. I did care. I wanted to understand what had happened to the love we once shared, why Sarah felt she had the right to take a lover on the side, knowing how I felt about fidelity. I kept up with what was happening back home, mostly through emails with Emily, who seemed to have decided, albeit late, to rebuild our relationship. She was clearly worried about David, who had indeed lost his job and was pleading with Sarah to let him move back home. I spoke to Sarah a few times, briefly, but whenever she started to cry or tried to apologize, I cut her off. I did promise her that I would sit down and listen to her when I returned. It was not going to change anything, but I wanted to hear what she had to say. Nothing would change my mind. By then, I had made my decision on what I wanted, and I wanted to live in Durango. As a result, I spent 3 weeks settling into my new home and helping Mark and Jessica with their business, and I was spending a lot of time with Sophie. We talked at length on Thanksgiving night about everything, much to Jessica's amazement and delight. And when I walked Sophie to her car, we just looked at each other and kissed. There was not a lot of passion in it, but there was a lot of promise. Over the 3 weeks I spent there before returning home, or rather, my soon-to-be former home, we went out probably a dozen times and grew increasingly close. I knew I had to be cautious because of Sophie's past. She had been deeply hurt by others and was wary of being hurt again. But the more I got to know her, the more I realized that despite her past, she was a woman of deep and genuine character. She was a warm, caring person with a great sense of humor and a zest for life that was contagious. Waiting was difficult because the more time I spent with Sophie, the more I wanted to be with her. She was so kind, so thoughtful, and yes, so vulnerable, but I understood her need to be careful, and I respected her desire to take things slowly. My patience was rewarded the weekend before I was scheduled to return to wrap up my business with Sarah. Mark and Jessica wanted me to get a real taste of Colorado, so they planned a 4-day ski trip. There is a nice ski resort just outside Durango, and Purgatory is close by, but they wanted me to enjoy the full ski experience, so they pulled some strings with a friend in the real estate business who helped us secure a nice 2-bedroom condo in Telluride, about 70 miles away. I was having dinner with Sophie one evening a few days before we were set to leave when the subject of the trip came up, and she asked what she should bring. I just kind of looked at her, and she gave me a knowing smile. "You knew I was going, didn't you?" she asked. "I was hoping, but I did not know if it was my place to invite you or not," I said. "You know the condo only has 2 bedrooms." "And how is that a problem?" she asked, smiling even wider. "Are you certain?" I asked, taking her hands and gazing into her eyes. "Absolutely certain," she replied. "I knew you were the one I had been looking for all my life the moment I met you. I know you. I know your heart. You are a good man, Robert, and you deserve to be happy." She sure did. We drove up to Telluride on a cold, clear Thursday morning. The early winter snow had been heavy in the mountains, so we expected the skiing to be good, and it was. I had gone skiing once before, a long time ago, when a group of us from college spent a week at Vail. Sophie had been once before, the previous season, with Mark and Jessica. Despite our limited experience, Sophie and I took the 1-day ski class that was recommended before we attempted the slopes on our own. Once we had learned the basics, she and I had a blast going up and down the mountain. We wisely stayed away from the black slopes, the expert trails, but we did try a few of the blue trails, the intermediate slopes, and found we could manage them quite well. It was exhilarating to spend time on the mountain with someone I was growing to care about deeply. I was not sure yet if I was in love or if she was in love with me, but we liked each other a great deal and felt comfortable in each other's company. We ended that first day sore and tired, but it was the good kind of soreness and pleasant tiredness that comes from having a lot of fun. The 4 of us ended up at a nice, reasonably priced restaurant for our post-ski dinner and toasted our rapidly deepening friendship in every sense of the word. When we returned to the condo, I showered and then relaxed on the large bed with a book while Sophie took a long bath. I considered joining her but decided not to push. I wanted her to make the first move. I am glad I did. She entered the bedroom smelling like flowers, wearing a long, comfortable robe. She stood just inside the door and smiled at me. Slowly, she untied the robe's sash and let the sides fall open. "See anything you like?" she asked, her soft Irish brogue sounding so sweet. I just nodded, admiring Sophie's tall, graceful form. My God, she was beautiful, with a warm smile and a gentle demeanor that made me feel at ease. I got up from the bed and walked over to her, softly caressing her arms as we embraced and kissed tenderly with a growing affection. It was as if we were in our own world as I gently ran my hands over her shoulders while she pulled me closer. We moved to the bed and lay down, our bodies close and our hearts even closer. We spent the evening talking and bonding on a deeper level, sharing our dreams and feeling the warmth of each other's company. It was a night I would never forget. The entire trip was like that. We tried nearly every non-black slope on the mountain, explored the shops and cafes of downtown Telluride, and spent each evening enjoying each other's company. By the time we returned to Durango, we knew it was more than just a passing connection. On the Tuesday before Christmas, I packed my car with a few suitcases and gifts for everyone, then headed back east for a few weeks. I stopped by my parents' house on the way, but did not stay long. I visited Lisa to give her a gift, but told her I had met someone in Colorado that I wanted to be with, and she smiled, saying she understood. "I would expect nothing less from you," she said. Amanda Taylor reacted similarly when I returned to town and called her up for dinner. "I knew it would not take long for someone to find you," she said. "You are too good a man to stay single for long. I am happy for you." I did not stay at the house when I returned. It was no longer my home, and I did not want to give Sarah any false hopes. I did visit quite a bit, and it was amicable enough, but we avoided the elephant in the room until after Christmas. It actually was not a bad Christmas. David had convinced Sarah to let him move back in, but she finally stood firm with him. He could stay, but he had to contribute around the house. He had come close to some serious trouble while living with his friends, and it seemed to have scared some sense into him, as he was seriously considering entering a rehabilitation program. Emily had taken my departure as a real wake-up call. She dumped the sketchy boyfriend and was taking more interest in school, realizing, as I had repeatedly told her in our email exchanges, that without at least a high school diploma, her chances of getting anywhere in life were slim. She had found a part-time job at a youth-oriented novelty store in the mall, where her quirky style and personality were appreciated. That left Sarah. The day after Christmas, Emily was at work, and I gave David some money and told him to go have fun at the mall. Sarah and I had serious matters to discuss, and we needed privacy. I brought the divorce papers I had received from Catherine Myers and placed them on the coffee table in the living room. Sarah just stared at them, her eyes filled with tears. "So, you have made your decision," she said. "I have," I replied, "but I think I deserve some answers first. Why did you cheat on me, Sarah? I know we had issues in our marriage, but if you had been honest about them, we might have worked through those issues." "I do not know. I guess I expected you to fight for me, fight for our marriage. I thought if there was competition for my affections, you would do whatever it took. It just went too far. I was confused, but that is no excuse. I let it happen, thinking I could, I do not know, have this little escape, get that feeling out of my system. I never thought you would give up on us so easily." "Sarah, what was there to fight for?" I asked softly. "You were unhappy all the time. David was a step away from disaster. Emily was heading down a bad path. The house was falling apart. Work was draining. And then you started seeing someone else. Honestly, what was there to fight for? And that still does not answer why you decided to betray me and kept doing it for months. That is something I just cannot understand." "It was a new experience," Sarah said. "It was a rush of excitement in a dull life. I guess I just needed something more. But Robert, you have to believe me. I never stopped loving you. You were always the number one person in my life, and you always will be." "I do not doubt that," I said, "although I am finding it hard to believe you loved me when you were with Daniel, especially when you were finding reasons to avoid being with me. I may have been the number one person in your life, as you say, but you were still paying plenty of attention to someone else." "I am so sorry for all of that," she said quietly. "I guess I lost sight of what was truly important. So, do you hate me now?" "No, of course not," I said. "We had 20 years together, and many of those were good years. You are the mother of my children, bless their hearts, and I think, overall, you are a decent person who got lost and made a costly mistake. No, I do not hate you, Sarah, but I do not love you anymore. That died the day I walked in on you and your lover. Maybe we just drifted apart, and Daniel saw an opportunity. In fact, I owe you my thanks. What you did provided the spark that allowed me to start a new life. doing things I always wanted to do in places I always wanted to be. "Well, it certainly suits you," she finally said. "You look fantastic. You do deserve to be happy, I suppose, and I guess I deserve to be unhappy, don't I?" she said, and I watched as Sarah finally lost her composure. I did not want to, but I went to her and held her one last time, letting her cry. After she calmed down, she signed the divorce papers, and since we were in a no-fault state and were divorcing on the grounds of irreconcilable differences, it would be final after 60 days. I stayed a couple more days to pack up the rest of my things and to spend time with the kids. I was still concerned about David, but it seemed Emily was going to be all right. She had found her niche in retail sales and seemed to have gained a newfound respect for me. On the penultimate day of the year, I said my final goodbyes and left to settle in Durango for good. That was a couple of years ago. Mark's business had started to thrive, and I found the variety of tasks I was asked to perform quite stimulating. I spent a lot of time polishing my book, and when I felt it was ready, I began shopping it around to publishers. Rising Again received some positive reviews and managed to make the lower end of some bestseller lists. It is on its third printing and still sells modestly. I am working on a second book, a novel about redemption, and my computer is filled with various essays and reflections that I may or may not ever publish. It does not matter. I am expressing my creativity in a way I never did before. Sophie and I fell deeply in love, and several months after we met, we were married in a small ceremony in Durango. Emily came out for the wedding, and she and Sophie became close. Emily was promoted to manager of the store where she had been working and seemed to be doing well. David's journey has been more challenging, and he is currently getting help for his issues. We have remained friends, and we still talk occasionally, mostly about what to do with David. His struggles have been tough, but we are hopeful that he will find his way. Some say betrayal is a devastating experience that destroys lives, and in some ways that may be true. It certainly destroyed my old life. But from the bitter ashes of that betrayal came a new, much better life for me. I am living the life I always dreamed of when I was growing up, in a place I always wanted to be. That would not have happened if I had stayed married to Sarah. She did me a favor when she made her mistake, and as a result, I was liberated to follow my own path. The best revenge is living well, and I am living a pretty damn good life thanks to my ex-wife and her decisions. Thank you, both. I needed that.
Thanks for hanging out with me on today's episode, brother. I'm Jack, host of this podcast, and it's great having you here. If today's story hit home, send it on to a buddy who might need it. Remember, we're all in this together, turning life's curvy balls into wins. If you have an opinion or story to share, then drop a line in the comments section. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss out. Until next time, keep your chin up and keep pushing forward. Stay strong, folks.